Okay, so we've got Jesse and there's Lydia. Lydia, can you hear us? Is Lydia on the phone?
She should be being connected.
She should be.
All right, can you guys, Lydia, can you hear me?
She's connected.
Okay.
I'm waiting for her to confirm.
Lydia? Testing.
Let me check on that. Hold on.
Hello.
All right, testing. Lydia?
Okay, Mayor, go ahead.
Lydia?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Wanted to connect you before we got our meeting started. Okay, everybody ready?
Yes.
All right. Welcome to the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council for September 17th of 2019. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, great. All right. Wanted to connect you before we got our meeting started. Okay.
Okay, welcome everyone. Councilmember Johnson is going to be joining us shortly. He had a work commitment. And we also have Councilmember Lydia Asefa-Dawson joining us remotely via telephone. Lydia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry about that.
Very good. All right, thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a study session. We'll have a city center access update with Rick Perez, our city traffic engineer. I call you a senior, I always call you a senior traffic engineer because of all your experience and all the trainings you do around the country. But with that, Rick, go ahead and proceed.
Well, thank you, Mayor, Council. So we're going to start off with an overview and background of the project. Some of you may recall that we've got this little project called City Center Access that is looking at ways to improve access to Interstate 5. And so one of the reasons why now is a good time to do that is obviously congestion is continuing to increase. We've got Sound Transit coming in 2024 and then extending to Tacoma in 2030, and that is going to be altering trip conditions in the Federal Way area. So we want to make sure that as we're planning ahead for this, that we do not have ideas and options precluded with Sound Transit. So historically, one of the things that's been going on, this is the level of congestion on Google Maps right now. This was actually measured on a Tuesday evening peak hour commute. And so you're seeing some pretty significant congestion, pretty much all of 320th and 99 and the I-5 ramps. So this is one of the things we're trying to resolve here. And the lower graph shows what volumes have been doing on 320th at least. We had a significant drop during the recession, and then things have been gradually recovering, and now it's starting to pick up again. So, you know, nobody comments, oh, gee, look at how much less traffic there is. But then when it returns, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So that's what we're dealing with right now. But in reality, right now, our volumes are still a little bit lower than what they were before the recession. However, that's expected to change. So this is our 2045 forecast for 320th just west of I-5, and that's assuming that the growth in Federal Way is consistent with the regional forecasts. And so what we're going to see is about 1,000 more vehicles per hour westbound on 320th and 600 more eastbound. So obviously this affects roadway traffic, but also transit. An increase in volume like that also has a tendency to create more delay for the side streets trying to cross, which includes pedestrians and bicyclists, and kind of puts a limit on potential economic development within the city. So one of the things that we're looking at, here's something else I want to show. So where are all these folks coming from and going to? Well, in the evening peak hour, actually we have almost half the traffic coming from the east on 320th in Peasley Canyon. 20% come up I-5 from the south, 35% coming from the north. Once they get off of 320th, 50% of them are heading to somewhere within city center. That was a surprise to me because most of the, residential is where you'd think people would be heading, but they're also stopping and shopping and whatever other activities. So 30% continue west on 320th, 15% head south, and 5% head to the north. So, once in a while we hear talk about, we should just build a tunnel underneath 320th and to get that traffic off. Well, that would help about 30% of the traffic. So we're trying to look at this holistically and figure out what the optimum solution is. So among the purpose and need, we obviously have congested corridors, poor multimodal mobility, and delayed emergency response, especially with the fire station east of I-5. And all that will continue to affect the quality of life and inhibit economic growth in the city center. The other thing that, of course, WashDOT and Federal Highways is concerned about is that the queues back up onto the I-5 main line. That impacts regional mobility, including freight, and it's a pretty significant safety impact to that too. So we need to be able to keep I-5 moving, or at least not be the cause of the congestion, and reduce potential safety impacts. So one of the things that changed since we did this 10 years ago, was now we have to evaluate what we could do to improve conditions on 320th with other roadway improvements. So this map shows all the different improvements that we looked at to try and divert traffic off of 320th. And so, we've solicited ideas from the public on this and evaluated them, and the bottom line is we could not divert enough traffic off of 320th to keep 320th moving. And that was about $1 billion worth of roadway improvements there. So we started looking at interchange options. As before, we looked at modifying access at 312th and at 324th, and also a combination of the two to see what we could do to improve that. So amongst the evaluation criteria, obviously decreasing congestion on 320th, improving access to city center, providing opportunities to travel around city center instead of directly through, improve the ability for bicyclists and pedestrians to get around, improve roadway safety overall, and make sure that what we come up with is feasible and constructible. Also addressing impacts to neighborhoods, parks, wetlands, cultural resources, commercial and industrial properties, and proposed future land uses, and be acceptable to residents and the public. So in that, we often hear, well, geez, just build an interchange at 288th or 304th and 336. And we've looked at those, and they simply did not. 288th diverted a lot of traffic off of 272nd, but it did almost nothing for 320th. And so as we looked at these alternatives, it was just, they still don't seem to address the problem that we're trying to address here. So the 312th and 324th options did improve operations on 320th and did reduce the queuing back onto the I-5 main line. So those are the ones that are moving forward. Then 312th, as we looked further into it, there was a couple different things going on. First off, Federal Highways doesn't want added access points onto the freeway main line, which means right now we have one off-ramp and one on-ramp in each direction. They do not want to see any more added. So everything that we're proposing here tonight is going to keep one off and one on in each direction. What's going to happen is you expand the footprint of the interchange by including these other roadways and providing ramps that go to both. So a couple of things, so we can't have an additional access on the I-5. There's safety impacts with that, there's congestion impacts with that. Secondly, with Sound Transit going in there, there was significant challenges in trying to come up with an alternative that didn't require shutting down the line once it was constructed. So, which Sound Transit's just not going to allow. If you can get in and out overnight, great.
Rick, I just want to say real quick that we shouldn't be feel picked on at all that they only want one access point in Federal Way, because it's the same thing is true in Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma.
Yeah,
So,
it's-
I mean, the collector distributors are something that's been utilized for a long time, so.
Exactly.
We shouldn't feel special, it's just.
No, it's
get it.
national policy.
Yeah, absolutely, okay.
So, yeah. So then some of the other things is, there are a variety of options that WashDOT is considering for what the future of I-5 would look like. And so one of the conditions placed on this project is we cannot preclude anything that they are talking about possibly doing, which does create some constraints for us. So 312 also has potential for impacting Steel Lake Park and the neighborhoods either side of I-5. And as a result, we have a lack of acceptance from nearby residents. And then finally, 312 kind of skirts the city center, but not the core. And so it doesn't directly address the same amount of trips headed to and from city center. As a result, we are dropping 312. So then we started looking at options for 324th. And I'll try not to get too deep in the weeds here, but basically, alternative 2A is what we call a split diamond. The on-ramps and off-ramps to and from the south, there's just one at 324th, and similarly from and to the north at 320th. And then these ramps would be connected by kind of a frontage road. This is actually what they're building down at Port of Tacoma Road in Fife. So, and this could work, but it gets really close to creating a problem here at the 320th, southbound off-ramp at 320th. And so as a result, if we had significant land use changes from what is forecast, that could be blown up again, and we could be back trying to figure out what to do about it. Alternative 2B is pretty much what we were talking about doing 10 years ago, where, and this is kind of like in the U District on I-5, how Northeast 45th and Northeast 50th work, where the ramps between the two interchanges cross it by grade separation. We call that a braid. And so that does address the traffic needs for that, can accommodate more shift in land use changes. One of the downsides is that it does impact Belmore Park a little bit more, and this light blue line is Sound Transit's alignment. So when we get to the point where southbound on-ramp from 324th merges with the southbound on-ramp from 320th, and then merges onto I-5, gets uncomfortably close to the Sound Transit proposed alignment.
I did a question. What kind of an impact to Belmar Park?
Okay, so basically it would involve some additional acquisition of homes. So above and beyond what you would need to put 324th across the freeway, the ramps would impact certain homes in Belmore.
Yeah, because last time that Sound Transit had talked to them, they were really upset with what they weren't going to get. So I don't think,
So,
you remember that meeting?
yeah.
And they were very upset because they'd been told one thing, and then when they come to find out, they come in and they disregard their trailers. They say they're too old, we don't have money for this, we won't pay for that. And they were very, very upset, as were those of us that were listening to them, because they were promised one thing, and then when they got down to it, they got nothing.
So are you referring to what the property owners
Yeah, the
offered
people that
them?
live there, that
Yeah.
have their trailers there,
Right.
yeah.
So that's not necessarily what Sound Transit promised them. It's just, it's.
No, it was Sound Transit, because they're taking the property on which they live, and they're not.
So they're a long ways from buying any property in Belmore Park. The alignment has not been finalized, but.
Well, I'm just telling you what they were told before by Sound Transit, so it's just
Okay.
something we want to keep in mind.
Okay. So,
Rick?
Yes.
Or council member. Mayor, if I can address that. So that, just to provide a little clarification, Councilmember Duclos, that was the mobile home park that was in the city of Kent that was acquired as part of the Federal Waylink Extension project. And those residents were speaking with the Belmore residents kind of as a lessons learned. And that's where those came from. So those are, you're correct, those are property acquisitions, but they were not in the city of Federal Way. It was in the city of Kent. So they heard mixed stories from the residents of the home park in Kent, some positive, some negative, and then, yes, came in, but it was not Belmore acquisitions.
Good.
okay, so one of the potential impacts of this is that Sound Transit would have to move its alignment further west, which would impact even more homes in Belmore. So this alternative 2H was trying to find a more cost-effective way of getting the best of both worlds. So the southbound on-ramp from 320th would go through the intersection of 324th. It would merge with the off-ramp to 324th. And one of the downsides of this is that then, since most of the traffic on going to 324th is going to want to turn right, and most of the traffic from 320th is want to go straight onto the on-ramp to I-5, that there'd be weaving going on between those two movements. First off, we're not sure that we can get enough queue storage space for that weaving to occur. And then secondly, it's still a lot of conflict in a short area of time, so there's a potential to increase collisions in that. Finally, because it is a weaving section, it does also limit the flexibility for future land use changes. Other than that, it's basically the same. It's basically alternative 2A with an added southbound on-ramp or off-ramp, but alternative 2B northbound. Are you following me? Okay. So then we get into options about, okay, how is the intersection at 324th, that interchange, going to function? So typically the base case, we start off with assuming that the newly created intersections are going to be signalized. They are relatively expensive to maintain and operate. One of the options we looked at to minimize the amount of conflicts in the area is to make 320th westbound and 324th eastbound between 11th Place and I-5. So what that does is it eliminates phases at the traffic signals, which then makes the intersections more efficient. So some of the downsides with that is that businesses aren't too thrilled about it typically, and it would require some significant issues for rerouting transit. Particularly, Metro is concerned about the 181, which goes 320th, basically from Twin Lakes Park and right over to Auburn. They're planning to upgrade that to rapid ride status. And so the out-of-direction travel would significantly impact their travel times, so they were concerned about that. And overall, when you see one-way couplets, they're usually like 1 block apart, not a quarter mile apart. So it creates a lot of out-of-direction travel. One of the other variations on the theme in alternative 2D and E is providing a loop ramp from 324th to go northbound on I-5. This makes it a lot easier to accommodate what we're assuming, particularly in the morning peak, would be a lot of traffic coming eastbound on 324th and heading north on I-5. And one of the downsides is this is the proposed warehouse that IRG is proposing to build. And so we'd be clipping the building footprint that they have right now. They have evaluated the trade-offs between a lot of these different interchange configurations, and they are not too thrilled about this one. They would much prefer other alternatives that didn't impact that site plan. For the most part, they're okay with ones that just, impact the property but not the building. Alternative 2F, I don't know if any of you have seen one of these. It's a diverging diamond interchange. The first one in the state is going to be built in Lacey well, most folks would know it as the interchange to get to Cabela's. So the way that works, first one was done in Missouri about 10 years ago in the U.S., but actually the first one ever done was outside of Versailles in France about 35 years ago, and it's still there. So basically the way this works is the two directions on 324th would cross each other. So you'd be driving across the freeway on the left and then come back. Now, what makes this attractive is that these would be signalized, and it's just a two-phase traffic signal, so you can keep it really short cycle lengths, and then the left turns, no matter which way you're going, you only have one signal to go through. And so it can handle very high left turn volumes. And so it provides some flexibility in terms of accommodating future land use changes. The downsides are that this tends to be a pretty wide bridge, and so it's pretty expensive to build. And then secondly, depending on how you handle the design speed of that roadway, these crossings end up taking more right-of-way. And in particular, this would impact the 320th Park and Ride, and so those spaces may need to be replaced. We have the other intersection control option would be to put in roundabouts. They can accommodate wide variations in traffic volumes. They tend to be the safest and have the lowest maintenance and operation expense. Again, here IRG expressed the concern that, okay, but at least make sure that you're accommodating the trucks, which WashDOT would make us do anyway. So anyway, so that's what we were looking at for the interchange itself. One of the other things looking at is how to accommodate non-motorized traffic here. Kind of the base case would be bike lanes and sidewalks across on both sides of 324th across the interchange. At this point, we've been assuming that an overpass at 324th would be the connection across I-5 to connect BPA Trail to the west with a future extension of BPA Trail east of I-5. And so how we manage this is important to that connectivity. One of the other options is if we just build a very wide path on one side of the roadway. These are typically 10 to 12 feet instead of a 8-foot sidewalk to be able to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians. Finally, with the DDI, you can route the non-motorist traffic in the middle, so they have one crossing across 2 lanes of traffic at each end of the interchange. So it's relatively efficient for them. The reason it switches sides is on this north side, it would connect to a path that goes past the DeVita site, connecting to the bike lanes on 32nd, that would eventually go all the way to the BPA Trail extension. So, one of the other things that Federal Highways and WashDOT want us to look at is, okay, what other local street elements might you need in order to make this work as efficiently as possible? So clearly, with a 324th assumption that you're extending 324th from 23rd to Weyerhaeuser Way, we're still trying to figure out how badly we need still to extend 312th across to Military Road and 32nd tying into it. Actually, we'll be meeting with WashDOT tomorrow to discuss that. Also, the comprehensive plan anticipates that the 3rd lane in each direction on 320th would become HOV, and that would eventually extend all the way east to Military Road through the interchange at I-5. So, this is showing the different bicycle and pedestrian connections with transit. So you have the existing rapid ride on red, the proposed rapid ride on 320th, Sound Transit, Federal Way Link extension here, and then the potential routes for the Tacoma Dome Link extension. Trails are shown in green here. Existing part of BPA Trail, the proposed extension to the east, where we have bike lanes in the solid green here, and dotted to show where they're proposed in the future. So, amongst the different outreach activities we've conducted, we did an open house, both online and in person, back in April. We have conducted stakeholder interviews among business and resident groups last year and this year. We've done tabling events at various events around the city, the Farmers Market, Red, White, and Blues Festival, and Summer Sounds. And we've also had additional neighborhood meetings. We met with Belmore Park and 312th and 324th. We'll be going back to them later this month. So EJ stands for Environmental Justice. We're not trying to promote our director here. And that's a particular environmental impact thing that we need to look at is, are we adversely impacting communities of resident people that might have been historically discriminated against, to make sure that it's an equitable solution. So we've been at the Korean Community Quarterly Meeting and Community Connections Roundtable, and we also have had business and property owner meetings, and those are also ongoing. It's coming up soon. We're proposing to have an open house again to present that we've narrowed it down to 324th and asked for feedback on the different options for how to treat 324th. And so the in-person open house will be October 10th, and we'll have the online open house from the 1st through the 14th. There will also be additional meetings with business and property owners and environmental justice communities. So what we're requesting of you is to concur with the preferred alternative for the team to move forward with in the preliminary design, environmental review, and the access revision report that WashDOT and Federal Highways requires. So the process to do that would be going to Land Use and Transportation November 4th, City Council meeting November 5th, where we will have hopefully presented it down to a preferred alternative that would be reviewed for environmental and start design. And 19th would be when the council, November 19th would be when the council adopted the preferred alternative. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Council? Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got opportunity for citizen comment. Is there anybody who would like to address the council at citizen comment? Oh, Councilmember Moore.
Thank you so much. Rick, I believe you've had some briefings for the public already, some.
Yes.
And Desiree has been heading some of those up as well, if I understand that correctly. What's some of the feedback or questions you're kind of hearing that jump out at you? I'm just kind of curious what the public's thought process is, thinking about, just curious. Thank you.
Mostly what we've heard is, yeah, something needs to be done. This looks like a reasonable way to do it. There was a lot of opposition expressed by folks near 312th, and also those concerned about impacts of Steel Lake Park. That's where the majority of the opposition has come from. There's a pick 324th instead. When we met with Belmore Park residents, there was obviously concern about impacts to them, and also the timing of that, given their discussions with the underlying property owner as well as Sound Transit. And so it gets a little difficult to separate those three activities in motion. But overall, 324 seems to be the preferred alternative by the public. And so that's one of the reasons we are heading that way.
Thank you.
Rick, I think we've all seen like games, well, I don't know if everybody's seen it, but SimCity is certainly one example of these games that we play that can build a city and watch it fall apart because we don't plan correctly, right? And obviously, that's our goal is to prevent that from happening. When we talk about modeling, do we have any tools available for to really model the different traffic patterns so that people could understand the impact of the different choices? Because I think, I pay attention to what's going on Facebook, and I think we're all idiots. There's nothing new there, but I think what's that?
Thank you, Park.
Yeah. But anyway, they talk about 324th, and 324th definitely has some merit.
Yes.
They say we should have done 312th, and 312th has some merit, but it also has, I think the impacts that we talked about with Steel Lake, and we've really gone down that path already. So I guess I'm going a long ways to get to my original question. Is there any tools available for the public to really begin to understand how the traffic would be positively impacted?
At one point, I had put together a presentation for how people think we actually operate versus how we actually do, and one of them includes throwing darts at a dartboard. It is a little bit more sophisticated than that. So first off, there's a regional travel demand model where Puget Sound Regional Council collects all the data for what the existing land uses are, what the major roadways are, and they program all that into this model. And then you calibrate the model by comparing what the model says with what existing traffic volumes are out there. So, and I'm trying to simplify this for the sake of brevity, but anyway, so then they come up with their land use forecasts, and I don't know how they come up with those, but bottom line is we feed those forecasts, land use forecasts in, and see what the model spits out. Now, there's a little bit of fine tuning with that, if it says, oh, we're going to send 1,000 vehicles per hour on 25th Drive on the north end of the city, it's like, yeah, that's a problem. We don't think that's really going to happen. But it is telling you that there's a capacity constraint that makes people want to go a different way. So anyway, so we evaluate that. We've taken the PSRC model and drilled down and created much finer detail within the city. To give you an idea, PSRC has 16 zones for the entire city of Federal Way. We break it down to about 600, and we model a finer level of detail on the streets. So we use that to come up with these forecasts, and then we put those into a different model that is used to calculate roadway capacity at individual intersections to make sure that, okay, the model says this many people are going to go that way. How does that street function under that scenario? And that's one of the ways we come up with what our capital improvement program needs to look like. So anyway, so that's kind of a quick overview of the process. And when things get really nasty, we say, oh, we're going to need an improvement here to address that. So that's in a nutshell.
Councilman Moore, and then the Deputy Mayor.
Actually, this is a question for Councilmember Copane. Was your request, and I appreciate the response, Rick, thank you. Was your question to what other tools can we use to better engage with the public to help them understand what we're discussing and what's going through, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So, my question, Rick, is, can we use videos, or can we use any sort of tool to continue, because I know you guys have engaged, but to continue to engage with the public on such an important part, which is the city center access?
Okay, so if you were here 10 years ago when we did the analysis, we actually had WashDOT's design visualization team develop simulated graphics of what these roadway improvements could look like. We don't currently have that in the budget, but that is something that we could look at. Secondly, there's a different model that WashDOT requires us to use to model the freeway operation impacts. And that is a pure simulation model. So with that, you can see how traffic, I mean, it models down to individual vehicles moving through the roadway network. And so we're using that to calculate travel times and to see what the impacts are with that. We use a slightly less sophisticated model for simulation of what the city streets are going to look like under that scenario, and we can certainly provide that.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Let me just to finish that question. But is there, I understand you're saying that there's no budget for us to put something together to give to the public for them to understand this project. Is that what I'm understanding? There's no budget for this?
Well, so, I mean, it's not in the current scope of work, is my understanding, so.
The answer is no.
Well, wait a minute, let me ask a question
Go
here.
ahead, please.
Could we put an article in the paper, in the Mirror, about this, and what you presented tonight, a whole page or 2 pages? I think the city would be able to afford to do something like that and have people read it there.
Well, and I think actually.
Well, it's a visual, you can have a visual in the paper, you know.
Yeah. I think actually for something like this, I don't think they would require us to pay for it. I think if it was a certain size and
Well,
we could have it, we could
let's-
have a presentation. that we
Let's
can provide.
investigate it and see, because a lot of people do read the paper.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, we'll look into that. Deputy Mayor, on that.
Thanks. When I came to one of these meetings here in this room, the room was pretty full, and most of the people lived around Steel Lake. So I would like to make sure that we're reaching way even past Twin Lakes with our citizens, so that they're not surprised about what's going on. But my question is, the 50% that go to city center, do they leave city center and then go out west or east or south?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would assume that a lot of it is, people stopping in at a particular destination on their way home. Especially since what we're talking about is based on evening peak hour trips. Because currently, we don't have that many residents in the city center, plenty of business. And so I don't think that would be their final trip destination. Yes. Oh, that's true. That was in the future, so we would in that, the 50% was in 2045 forecast. So by that time, we would assume that there is more residential development in city center. So some of those trips would be their final destination.
So did this take into account light rail and perhaps the fact that we'll have less traffic because of light rail?
So definitely all the entire transit network is also modeled in the travel demand model. And so there's a process by which before they calculate, well, first they calculate person trips. Then they do a mode choice model that says, okay, if folks from this area want to take transit, how long does that take? How much more does it cost than them driving? And it does that with all modes. Transit is explicitly modeled. Freight is kind of implicitly modeled. Anyway, so that includes light rail and bus service. So all that is built into the model, and the model, when it does that comparison of travel times and all that, which again is calibrated to existing conditions as well, then it will say, okay, this many people are going to use light rail, this many people are going to use the bus to get to light rail, this many people are going to go to the transit center in their cars and then take light rail, or whatever. So all that is built in.
And my last question is on Highway 18 and the off-ramps there.
Yes.
Were any studies done down there to see if they have the same amount of traffic or if we could push more traffic down that way?
Yeah, so actually there wasn't a whole lot of movement one way or the other, I think, because all three interchanges in Federal Way are going to be pretty heavily impacted by 2045. So I don't recall there being very much shift between interchanges, that all of a sudden you make one better and it lightens the load at the other ones. I don't think that we weren't seeing that at all.
Thank you.
All right, council, any other questions? All right, thank you. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak? Please, Dana.
Well, you know me, funding. The funding for this project, is it state and federal grants, or how much of it is from the city? Percent's even good enough for me, just curious.
Okay, we'll get the answers after you
Okay.
comment.
What is the start time that we're talking about this actually being implemented? Is it going to be going on at the same time ST3, after ST3, whatever? And does the modeling that you're using include the estimate of how many TOD housing units will be resulting from ST3 surplus property? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so funding, timing, ST3.
Okay, well, I can address the timing pretty quickly because it's dependent on the funding. And so right now, the city has funded this effort to narrow down alternatives, get through the environmental process. That's a relative drop in the bucket compared to what it's going to cost to construct it probably. So you're looking on the order of maybe 3% to get through environmental and preliminary design. At that point, we would be positioning the project to either get grants that we could implement or hand the whole project off to the state. So it will require us lobbying the state legislature to fund this project at that level. So we've, in the legislative agenda, we have asked for set-asides for this project. Over the long haul, it's probably going to have to be something that WashDOT has to manage, and so we will be looking to have them get the funding from the legislature. And then the third question.
TOD development.
TOD development, yes. So The land use forecast provided by PSRC does assume TOD redevelopment near station areas. I can't tell you how much of that is broken out as to this is TOD and this is what would happen in the city anyway, but that is all built into the model.
All right, Deputy Mayor.
So this will come to council November 15th or whatever the date was. Is it possible that future councils could change what we vote on?
That is always a possibility. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Council, anything else? Any other public comment? Okay. With that, council, any questions or further discussions about this issue? Okay, we've got about 10 minutes before the regular city council meeting begins. This special meeting is adjourned, and we will come back in about 10 minutes.